In the last video, we discussed Ulrich Zwingli. Now we turn to a far more influential thinker of the Protestant Reformation, John Calvin. Calvin was the key architect of Reformed and Presbyterian Christianity, and his ideas helped shape not only Protestant theology, but also the organization and governance of many Protestant churches. Calvin belonged to the second generation of Protestant reformers. While Martin Luther initiated the Reformation, he was not a systematic thinker. Calvin, by contrast, approached theology with the precision of a trained lawyer. He provided both a thorough and logical system of Protestant theology and a clear blueprint for how a Protestant church should be structured and governed. Born in 1509, Calvin was still a child when Luther posted the 95 Theses. Unlike Luther, Calvin was French rather than German, and his father, though not a member of the clergy, worked as a lay official within the church. Calvin was originally expected to become a lawyer and serve in the legal administration of the French church. However, while studying at the University of Paris, he encountered Luther's writings, which led to what he later described as a sudden and dramatic personal conversion. God, by a sudden conversion, subdued and brought my mind to a teachable frame. Because expressing belief in salvation by faith alone was dangerous in Catholic France, Calvin was questioned by university authorities and, following the advice of his friends, fled to Switzerland. In 1536, at just 26 years old, Calvin published the first edition of his major theological work, The Institutes of the Christian Religion, which quickly became the most important and widely used book of the Reformation. He continued to revise and expand the work throughout his life, producing a second edition in 1539 that was twice as long as the first, and a final 8th edition in 1559 that was twice as long as the 1554 version. The Institutes provided the first fully systematic explanation of Protestant theology and served as the foundation for Reformed churches throughout Europe and beyond. The hallmark of Calvin's theology is its starting point, the absolute sovereignty of God. For Calvin, God is wholly sovereign, and the entire universe depends completely on God's will. Everything that exists has been created for God's glory. In contrast, human beings, because of the fall, are inherently sinful, bound by original sin, and entirely incapable of saving themselves through their own efforts. Because humanity is helpless in sin, Calvin concluded that God has eternally predestined some people for salvation and others for damnation. This decision, he argued, was made before any person was born, indeed, before the creation of the world, and depends solely on God's will rather than on any human merit. Calvin defended this doctrine by pointing to biblical examples, such as the Hebrews, who are repeatedly described as God's chosen people, without any indication that they were more virtuous or deserving than others. Critics contended that predestination rendered human choice meaningless, but Calvin responded that this objection misunderstood God's nature, insisting that there is no difference between God knowing something and God willing it. God knows what will happen because God wills it. Calvin even maintained that God willed Adam's fall, since nothing can occur outside divine will. At the same time, Calvin refused to allow predestination to serve as an excuse for sin, emphasizing that wrongdoing is humanity's own responsibility and arises from human corruption, not from God's predestination. If some are saved and others are not, can one know who belongs to the elect? For many years, Calvin's answer was no. God alone knows. However, this uncertainty proved pastorally difficult, and under pressure from followers, Calvin eventually proposed a practical approach, sometimes referred to as the Freytag test. According to this idea, certain signs might suggest that a person belongs to the elect: a sincere, heartfelt profession of faith, a decent and godly life, and regular participation in the Lord's Supper. These signs were not guarantees, but only indications. Calvin clarified that those who do none of these things have no reason to think they are among the elect, while those who do practice them still lack certainty, but may possess greater hope. Some critics argued, if my fate is already decided, why bother living a Christian life at all? Calvin answered this objection decisively by insisting that predestination should motivate, not discourage, moral living. A righteous life, however imperfect, serves as a sign that God may be at work within a person, and those who are among the elect will live godly lives because God's grace compels them to do so. Even those who are not among the elect, Calvin maintained, should still honor God by obeying him as much as they are able. Predestination, Calvin insisted, is not a doctrine of despair, but one of humility, obedience, and trust. John Calvin was one of the most influential thinkers of the Protestant Reformation, whose ideas helped shape the course of early modern Christianity and beyond. He systematized Protestant theology into a coherent framework, shaped the structure and governance of Reformed and Presbyterian churches, and introduced a rigorous doctrine of predestination. Calvin's influence extended far beyond theology, affecting European nations and later contributing to the development of American culture and political institutions. In the next lecture, the discussion will explore how Calvin's theology compares and contrasts with Luther's, as well as how Calvinism spread across Europe.